Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, signed. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
That's she confirmed.
Thank you, Clerk, and good morning, members. To Fáilte Roamh Lig. Can I call the meeting of the Committee for Communities now to order and welcome all members to the 78th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery there that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. No recordings or photographs are to be taken. Can I also remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of the cameras when using the tablet device. I'd also like to remind everyone once again about the sensitivity of the microphones. And for any members joining via Zoom, can I ask you to be mindful of whether the camera can pick up any background images on your device, or whether you wish to blur your background. Agenda item 1, members, declaration of interest. I'd remind members of your responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. Does any member have any interest to declare in relation to today's agenda? Kelly?
Just to say that I'm an associate of the Chartered Institute of Housing.
Thank you. All members otherwise content? Yeah. Okay. Members, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 2, apologies. Are members aware of any apologies? No. Clerk?
No.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, members, chairperson's business. And members, I'm sure you're aware the executive has been pledged 17 million to mitigate heating costs here. While this is a very welcome announcement, it clearly, first of all, is nowhere near enough money in terms of the scale of the crisis that's facing us, and I think the British Treasury need to step up to the mark much more significantly. I think we also need to hear from Department for Communities officials in relation to any plans they have for distribution of the funds. I would therefore like to propose that we invite departmental officials to brief us on their plans to get this money out to people. Members content?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Agenda item 4, members, is draft minutes, which are at page 7. Do members have any edits or amendments to the draft minutes they wish to make? Yep. Are members therefore content to agree the minutes of the 12th of March as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 5 is our housing first substantive briefing on the Housing Amendment Bill 2026. This is a pre-introductory evidence from the Department for Communities. The briefing paper, members, for the agenda item is at page 20 of the meeting pack. Can I now welcome the following officials to the meeting? So we have Heloise Brown, who is Acting Director of Social Housing Policy and Oversight in the Department for Communities, and Stephen Baird, and Stephen is Deputy Principal, Social Housing Policy Branch in the Department. Heloise, I think it's yourself maybe is going to make some opening remarks, and then we'll come to members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to brief you today on the forthcoming Amendment Bill and to talk through the content of the bill before it comes to the Assembly. You have had a written briefing, I think, which sets out the provisions that are to be included in the bill. The proposals that are in it stem from long-standing engagement with stakeholders about how to best address unacceptable behaviour in communities, particularly where the current powers appear to be ineffective, and that might be a subject that we return to, the effectiveness of the current powers. So the proposals are intended to clarify and strengthen the existing legislation to deal with the most serious unacceptable behaviour. Landlords have a range of mechanisms available to them to deal with unacceptable behaviour, and it has to be stressed all of these measures are taken as part of a staged and an incremental approach. The Department has been advised by social landlords and other stakeholders that some of the current powers that are in place are not as effective or enforceable as they could be. So members may wish to note in particular the 3 key provisions in the proposed bill. First of all, there are proposals to make changes to how injunctions can be used to tackle unacceptable behaviour. So discussions with stakeholders, including the Department of Justice, identified the need to lower the threshold for landlords to apply to the courts for an injunction, and that's the first element of the changes to injunctions. And this proposal is in there because social landlords have told us that the current threshold is far too high for their requests to be met. The proposed changes will make injunction a more useful tool that landlords can use to try to bring unacceptable behaviour to an end before it escalates to a more serious level. So there's an element of lowering the threshold. And the proposed changes then would also introduce a power for courts, when they're granting an injunction, to attach a power of arrest without warrant for use when an injunction has been breached, including a power of entry for the police service. This would only be available where the court believes, and it would be a decision by the court, believes there is use or threatened use of violence or there's a significant risk of harm to others. And again, the purpose of this provision is to enable a quicker resolution to the behaviour before it escalates, so there's an opportunity for intervention. And there were a few more changes that were set out in the briefing paper around retaining the power to exclude over 18s from residential tenancies where there's significant risk of harm, and adding positive requirements with an injunction also. And there's a move then to refer to unacceptable behaviour rather than antisocial behaviour, just because antisocial behaviour is seen as slightly pejorative. So those are the proposals around injunctions and the changes to injunctions. The second part of the bill proposes enabling absolute grounds for possession of a social home. So this specifically applies to social landlords. And this new power would streamline the process for a social landlord obtaining an order for possession in cases where there's a previous court order without having to prove the case again in another court. So this would, for example, instead of landlords needing to bring witnesses to obtain the order for possession, they could refer to what was decided by a previous court and use that rather than having to bring witnesses back into court for the purpose of seeking possession. And again, here we'd emphasise possession is always a last resort for social landlords. They have a series of measures that they will take as they're going through looking at dealing with antisocial behaviour or unacceptable behaviour, and they will always go through those before they get to the point of seeking possession of the property. And you may also just wish to note, as I think the briefing paper set out, that this doesn't change the landlord's powers in terms of seeking possession. It's an attempt to expedite the process a little bit and take some of the pressure off social landlords themselves, but also potentially also witnesses. So the third group of changes then are the changes to eligibility in respect of homelessness decisions and social housing allocations that will enable a housing executive as the manager of the waiting list and the statutory body with the homelessness duty to take a decision where the most serious unacceptable behaviour indicates that somebody isn't suitable to be a tenant. So the provision is really to clarify that a decision can be made by the housing executive at any stage until the granting of a tenancy, rather than, for example, at the time somebody first presents or at the time an initial decision is made. So it's to avoid cases where tenancies are granted to individuals who are engaged on a recent and ongoing basis in the most serious unacceptable behaviour. And again, we would emphasise this is about looking at somebody's recent behaviour and their ongoing behaviour and looking at whether it is serious and having an impact on other people. Again, those proposals were subject to consultation as part of the fundamental review of social housing allocations, and they received high levels of support. We've engaged extensively with social landlords and tenant representative groups who have indicated that they think these proposals will help to address their concerns that currently antisocial behaviour is not being dealt with as effectively as it could be. So that's the provisions in the bill. Obviously, we recognise that there's a tight time frame for bringing legislation through in the remainder of the mandate, and we're keen to engage with the committee as the bill's finalised and prepared for introduction. So happy to take your questions.
Okay, thank you, Heloise. So a couple from me and then I'll come to members. So first of all, what evidence does the department have that the core problem is the current legal threshold rather than inconsistent use of the powers already available, given that fewer than 10 injunctions have been granted in the last 5 years?
The evidence is partly that the Housing Executive reporting that they find it very difficult to do the work to bring the level of evidence required to successfully obtain an injunction. So that their effort is going on meeting the legal threshold rather than being able to intervene earlier to address the behaviour. And when we look at what is in place in other jurisdictions, in England and Wales, for example, they have introduced similar changes to injunctions that are proposed here, and they have seen that local authorities are able to use those and bring them forward more effectively. It's still for the court to make a decision, but they're able to intervene earlier in the process, which is helpful.
Yeah. And I do understand that these can be very vexatious issues and that they can create significant problems for people and indeed communities. However, there's also an imperative here around human rights as well. So in terms of lowering the threshold for injunctions from behaviour that's causing or likely to cause nuisance to the proposal to merely capable of causing nuisance, what safeguards will be in place to ensure that this power is not used disproportionately or too early, and what discussions have taken place with the Human Rights Commission to ensure that they are content that this is compliant with human rights?
I can certainly check the Human Rights Commission's input. I don't know that they responded to the consultation. I don't think they did, but certainly all of those changes in terms of the decisions made by the courts will take into account the obligations in the Human Rights Act, and that is why the proposals are for bringing it to the court for decision, and the court to balance the human rights of the person who's having the injunction against them as against their impact, the impact that their behaviour is having on someone else. So it is very much about keeping that decision within the courts to decide in order to address the human rights concerns around making an injunction.
And given that rights are so centrally involved, both for communities, I'll stress again, and individuals or families, is it not unusual that the Human Rights Commission wouldn't have been central to the drafting?
I mean, we certainly obviously engage as we need to in drafting of the proposals. There's been a lot of engagement with the Department of Justice, which obviously is very familiar with the human rights elements of changes to powers for these type of powers. This is really what we're hoping to use sort of the early introduction and discussion of the bill for. If you think it would be useful for us to speak to the Human Rights Commission, we're happy to take that away and do that and report back as we go on. Okay,
thank you. I'll come then to members. So I have Kelly first, Agus and Shin, Tamajigul, Gujimo Lisa. So Kelly or Eileen.
Thank you. I just have a few questions, so if you bear with me, I'll try and get through them very quickly. Unacceptable behaviour is a divergence away from antisocial behaviour. Who will be the determiner of what unacceptable behaviour is? Because it reflects, when we look at paragraph 8 of the paper, there would be required evidence of conduct which is capable of causing nuisance or annoyance under unacceptable behaviour. But what is unacceptable to me could be unacceptable, a very different thing to someone else.
Some of this is in the nuance around the proposed wording. I think it's capable of causing nuisance or annoyance rather than causing, so you need to have evidence that somebody has caused it. And there's an emphasis on proof, and Stephen will come in if at any point you want to. But it's removing the requirement for proof of the significant risk of harm, so there's a slight movement away from proof, but there's the court's scope to take a decision on, is this behaviour actually causing nuisance or annoyance at present, or having that impact in terms of, is there going to be a significant risk of harm? It brings the court more...
I'm just worried that we've had... Bear with me. So, for instance, flags flown on lampposts. The police quite often say, not doing anything with that because it'll kick off community unrest. That's a potential cause of. What I'm worried about is if you have instances like we've had before because somebody's a different colour of skin or assumed to be an illegal refugee or things like that. Is that them causing the harm? Would they ever be the, fall foul of this reference? I don't know who's taking the decision about what's unacceptable behaviour. It's quite emotive.
It is. I mean, Stephen, do you want to come in on that, on the detail of that?
This is in the context of the injunctions. Take it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's a court decision essentially. The court won't order an injunction unless the court believes that the application meets the threshold. So this is a decision for a judge. It's not a decision for landlords or their staff.
Can I ask then, it doesn't mention anywhere in this about data and sharing of data. In my constituency, we have had a significant amount of antisocial behaviour caused by prescribed organisations, paramilitaries. And because the housing executive couldn't share or wouldn't share the information with the housing association, it made the process so much more long drawn out. It was actually the police who, under the term may provide information, was able to move this on a lot quicker for the benefit of everyone involved. Is there anything that's going to be within the proposed legislation that enables data sharing, that takes away this gatekeeping rule?
There isn't specifically within this. Obviously, we're aware of those issues as well because they're raised with the department, and it's certainly an area that we thought had been addressed with previous legislation that gave power to share data. GDPR, I think, came after that legislation came in, and that has caused some nervousness among those organisations. So what we're doing is working with those organisations, all of the housing associations who are speaking to the housing executive, and they're speaking to the PSNI, and they're keeping the department informed about how that's progressing. But we want to get to a point where they feel they're getting the right information, and we feel that there is a clear provision in the previous legislation for them to do that. It's just that everybody has reassessed their data sharing after GDPR. So we need to just get them through, I think, that process so that they are getting the data that they need, because they should have it, because they're going to be the landlord if they're discharging the statutory homelessness duty by allocating somebody to a housing association home. They still need to have the information that they should have. So it's not within this bill, but it is something that we're regularly engaged in.
Very helpful. The next one is, I've been speaking to Housing Rights, and Housing Rights have raised a concern that when, given the evidence from England, the draft, is the department content that positive requirements, so if someone is deemed to be causing issues, have unacceptable behaviour, there has been an issue in England where there hasn't been enough money and investment into those positive actions being taken with the person. We see it with supporting people all the time, that there isn't enough money going into supporting people, and we have the lowest paid frontline workers dealing with very difficult and complex cases. In the matter of this, where somebody has unacceptable behaviour, are you confident that there will be enough money to deal with this, and that if it's a third party, like supporting people, that they will be invested in enough to deal with these issues?
I think, in terms of the bill, I think the answer is very much for the court to be sure that when it makes a requirement, that requirement can be met. And I think so there will be the provision in place for that support.
And is that coming from the Department of Communities or Justice?
I would assume that's coming through supporting people, as you say, that it's coming through that route. So what I would say is the numbers at the moment are very, very small. So when we're looking at 10 or 20 people, even if that
housing
increased...
executive figures, sorry. Is that housing executive figures or housing associations as well?
That's housing executive. I don't know of any in housing associations. We can check if there have been any, but my assumption would be that the housing associations haven't brought any injunctions.
Well, they have, yeah. They removed them out of my constituency, they had to, yeah. So that there have been others, yeah.
So I just to conclude, what I would say is it's the housing executive responsible for supporting people. So if those numbers go up in terms of positive requirements, we would expect that we would be able to facilitate those within the Supporting People programme, certainly.
And then just the issue that was brought up by the Chair about Article 8 of the ECHR and the current existence of a means to grant possession, which balances the weight of evidence against the Article 8 and Article 6 of human rights. It makes it quite complicated. Are you satisfied that the proposal is legislatively competent and that there's a risk that vulnerable individuals can be more easily enter chronic homelessness, where there'll be a further risk of ASB escalating?
I think in everything to do with ASB, there's a balance between engaging with somebody so that they realise that their behaviour is having an impact, and that's why that is a very, very graduated process of engagement by landlords. And having a deterrent that there is a consequence if they don't engage. So there's a bit of balance there. And I think that's where support is really important. That's where it has come in Scotland, it has come in England. And there are issues around resources, but actually we would want to target resources towards supporting individuals who are causing wider issues in communities. So it's getting that balance between, I think, the impact for that individual of that action.
Does that mean then that if somebody's at risk or they have been they're being investigated about unacceptable behaviours, like an interim period where they'll not be removed from being provided with housing or having full duty status?
And so in terms of the eligibility, it will depend on recent behaviour. So certainly the way the housing executive operates at the moment is somebody can re-establish their eligibility if they're told they're not eligible because of ASB. So over a period of time, if there's no further unacceptable behaviour, the housing executive can look at their case afresh and decide that they are eligible, and that would still be the case. But it would allow, these two measures between them would allow that the recent behaviour is taken into account when the decision is made, but also then if there's further behaviour after the decision, that decision can be changed. So it is a way of keeping people engaging with support, I suppose, and with requirements to improve their behaviour where it is the most serious. And again, these aren't kind of light sort of elements of ASB. These are the more serious. The areas of concern have been, for example, where somebody's caused serious damage to property and therefore, a landlord would have a concern about then putting them into a home where their mental health would cause them to do further damage. So it is about very much getting the balance of requiring support.
And that data sharing is key in that, because gathering the evidence will require, if somebody's being removed from housing executive, not getting a housing association home, and they're in the private rental sector, where do you get that data from? Because they're not required to hold it. I'm just worried that there are cases of people who have had illnesses or breakdowns and damage has been caused. Get the right medication, they get support and they're okay, but how long is that shadow going to fall over them? Yeah. No, thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just picking up on that, Heloise, you've mentioned there a few times Department of Justice and courts. What indication have you from the Department of Justice that they are confident that this new lower level will be enforceable? And indeed, is acceptable behaviour a concept that has a definition to it in any other precedent?
It's defined within the legislation as sort of conduct sort of causing nuisance or annoyance, I suppose, and acts of waste or neglect. So antisocial behaviour as a term doesn't really appear within our housing legislation, which have predated.
But we're moving from, but to be clear, we're moving from antisocial behaviour to this new acceptable behaviour, which includes likely may cause harm.
Sorry, Chair. There's no single legal definition of antisocial behaviour or unacceptable behaviour. Those terms are defined in legislation for the purposes of various legal provisions in relation to possession, injunctions, eligibility and so forth. Each of those has their own legal definition.
Yeah, Thank you. And have DOJ indicated that they're satisfied this is something that
Yes.
when it comes that length that this is something they can address?
Certainly, yes. So the proposals were developed in discussion with DOJ at a joint working group. The public consultation was a joint public consultation on a number of other measures as well as the ones in this bill. We're doing further engagement just with the Department of Justice, Court Service and some of the other justice sort of ALBs to just confirm that they're happy with the provisions in the bill. So that's ongoing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Well, Lisa, go ahead, please.
Fáilte Rove, Heloise and Stephen, you're both very welcome. And again, too, it's on this whole sort of unacceptable behaviour. And I know, Stephen, you've said that, okay, there'll be a definition, we'll say, within the legal system in itself, but I'm just not that confident that it'll be that clear to all, to such an extent that where it ensures that people are not victimised in a sense because of what might be deemed as unacceptable behaviour. So are you concerned, we'll say, that the bill in itself will unfairly target vulnerable people, and that in what way will the bill, we'll say, be a deterrent in relation to anyone's behaviour? Because very often too, whenever it does come to unacceptable behaviour or ASB, it might have to be over a period of time, I would have assumed, rather than it being deemed to be, we'll say, a one-off reaction in a certain situation. So again, are there safeguards in place here to ensure that landlords don't abuse their power? So in fact, I know I'm posing three different scenarios or three different questions there, but effectively, to me, in a sense, it summarises some of the difficulties with this legislation.
Well, the department issues guidance to the Housing Executive on how it expects these legal provisions to be operated, and certainly within that guidance, it's made very clear that sanctioning a vulnerable person whose behaviour as a consequence of mental health issues, for example, that's actually contrary to disability discrimination legislation, and they must not do it. Those cases need to be treated with compassion and support rather than sanction, which wouldn't be appropriate and might not even be effective.
If I can pick up on the abuse of power question as well, Mr. McHugh, I think was the second one you mentioned. It would be for landlords to bring it to the court. They would still have to satisfy the court, and that's where the safeguard is. I think the landlord has to bring the evidence to the court and satisfy them that there is clear unacceptable behaviour that is impacting on communities and meeting that legal definition. So,
can I just come in on that, Chair? But the data. So if someone has a mental health condition and they haven't disclosed that to their landlord for fear of being removed, how does a landlord prove that if they don't have access to data? Like the health records or another previous landlord?
They generally wouldn't have access to that information. Certainly, it would be very much about the engagement with the tenant that is done throughout the process of the process of engagement and mediation.
Well, is there anything there but that will ensure that landlords don't abuse this power one way or the other, and the way that they would present the case, for say, even to the courts or whatever?
It's probably important to note that what the legislation is offering landlords, certainly in terms of injunctions and orders for possession, is not so much a power, it's a facility to approach the courts and ask the court to take action. The power actually rests with the court. It's the court that has the power to make an injunction if it chooses to do so, and it's the court that has the power to grant an order for possession. So really these decisions are their decisions for the court at the end of the day. The landlord may ask the court to do these things, but the court decides whether these things will be done or not.
Well, as I say, I'm sure every MLA is aware within their own areas and that when landlords have, we'll say, declared that in order to get rid of a tenant, they're going to sell the property. and there might not be any truth at all in relation to that. So as soon as the tenant is forced to move out because they've been declared homeless or the likes of it, the property isn't sold. So again too, that I do think that there is that opportunity even within this legislation as well too, that unless people sort of take on board to ensure that tenants and themselves are safeguarded as well too, that there could be abuses there.
Yes, I know that there's a big concerns, particularly around, as you say, private rented sector landlords. We can certainly look into that more as we come back with this bill. Happy to do that, to bring you more information.
Thank you, Chair.
Margaret, Melissa, Mark, Tom, could you toss it anish Lanneray at all? Mark Durkin. Mark, are you here? Yeah, there's your microphone. Microphone now, Mark. Thank you.
Apologies. Again. I welcome Heloise and Stephen. This is important legislation, but it's therefore important that we get it right. An issue here is that the proposed legislation will enable to treat someone as ineligible for assistance on the basis of their unacceptable behaviour at any stage up to the point where tenancy is granted, unless that behaviour is deemed likely to cease. And I know there are similar powers already in existence, and you've explained, I suppose, why they maybe haven't been as effective as they could have been to date. But will this proposed legislation also, would it enable the housing executive to determine where someone might be housed, or will it just be whether or not someone should be housed?
So, housing executive can owe a person a duty while it's making those inquiries, and when it makes a decision, it can give them a reasonable amount of time to make alternative arrangements, but it would then be on the person who's been refused eligibility to make those alternative arrangements. So it would mean they have to sort some alternative in terms of accommodation, because they couldn't go on the social housing waiting list and they wouldn't be eligible for the full homelessness duty. So it is, we do recognise that's a very serious change, and this is why the focus is very much, this is the most serious antisocial behaviour. And I think the balance of those two changes that are set out within the paper are really to enable a housing executive to change a decision if it needs to, but therefore it can take behaviour into account and take other measures into account to enable it to be more inclusive in terms of the people it brings in, because it has a backstop if behaviour changes to remove their eligibility. So it should bring more people within the scope of eligibility than there are at the moment, on the basis that if their behaviour changes, that eligibility can be removed. I appreciate that doesn't, I know, as you say, they will have to find an alternative form of accommodation. But again, this is a pathway, there's a deterrent.
I'm sort of thinking, if there's someone who has applied and they may have been guilty of unacceptable behaviour, there's a scale, I suppose, of unacceptable behaviour, and you could say, well, that might not happen again, but they're top on the list for the next allocation, and there's an apartment or a house that has become available in Albert Square. But if you move them into that house, which you have to because they're top of the list and it's the next available suitable property available, that they might be more likely to fall into their old ways of unacceptable behaviour. So can it be used by the housing executive to say, well, no, we're getting you somewhere, but we can't put you there?
No, they would be very much focused on the applicant's area of choice and the type of property they need. So there's no part of this that would be related to the area of choice. It's a straightforward decision on eligibility in terms of the applicant's recent and ongoing behaviour. So that shouldn't be the case, that scenario.
Yeah, because sometimes these issues can be mitigated just by the area that someone or some people are in. And then just my final question, Chair, you referred to the effectiveness of similar changes or the threshold in other jurisdictions, and cited, I suppose, the fact that there had been more, or are now more, injunctions issued in those areas. But had there been any assessment, I suppose, of any wider social impact as a consequence has there been an increase in homelessness or rough sleeping in those areas?
We don't have that information, I'm afraid. It's quite difficult to get information at sort of local authority level, at a comparable local authority level, that would tell us how it has worked. We know those injunctions are welcomed and are being used more in England than the previous forms, which would have been more similar to what we currently have in Northern Ireland. So we don't have that data. No, again, we're happy to take away the option to look to try and delve into the impact that has had.
Yeah, I think it's important to have as much information as possible to determine whether something has been successful or not. But no, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And Pam, go ahead.
Chair, thank you very much for your time today, committee. I suppose just in terms of, could you give us some actual examples of what we're talking about in terms of using the terminology unacceptable behaviour and versus antisocial behaviour, and could you give us examples of what the kind of most serious cases of those would be, just so that we can practically think out scenarios of what we're actually talking about?
Okay. So particularly because the test is around when a landlord, it's behaviour that would meet the threshold for a landlord to obtain a possession order, and that's a sort of theoretical example, because for the proposals in the bill around eligibility, you're just looking at whether somebody's eligible. One of the examples that was presented when we first started to look at this area was somebody who was in temporary accommodation and had set fire to it and had destroyed it. So we'll look at an example like that and say, well, obviously there's a vulnerability, because actually most people coming through this route, if not all of them, will be vulnerable and they may well have mental health issues. So there are obviously vulnerabilities there. And I suppose the concern for a landlord is if you invest in your homes and put somebody into them that you know is in the mental position where they're probably going to damage that home, then you're entitled to a possession order because you know that they would set fire. So that was an example that was highlighted to us quite early on of just when the damage to that home would be extensive. It does not make sense to just put that person in that home without further support or without them being tenancy ready, and that needs to be the focus really, is helping people to understand the impact of that behaviour and how you can re-establish eligibility. There will be other examples. I mean, I think what was quite useful in the figures was really high levels of reports of ASB, but a lot of them are new reports, which I would read as them being sort of relatively low level. I think the serious ASB is more exceptional in terms of being risk to people or threat to life, a threat to your neighbour or, to somebody who is coming to the house or past the house. So those are the kind of things that would alert the landlord, and therefore they would try to engage to address that issue. And they, it would make them concerned about the safety of the people who are in their other properties nearby or in the neighbourhood nearby. Stephen, are there any examples that you would want to bring forward?
Yeah, well, it'll depend probably on the actual provisions in the bill that we're talking about. As far as injunctions and absolute grounds are concerned, those are dealing with people who are currently tenants, and the kind of antisocial behaviour that's going to be involved is something that is going to cause issues for those people's neighbours and people living in the locality. And you can imagine the kind of things that we're talking about. It would be noise issues, persistent parties, loud music, or abuse or assault of their neighbours, possibly some kind of crime like burglary, drug trafficking, vehicle crime, all those kind of things that make life difficult for people living in their vicinity. As far as the other provisions, the eligibility provisions, those people, of course, are not actually tenants. They're people who are applying to landlords with a view to becoming tenants. So their behaviour has to be viewed under the legislation. It's looked at speculatively, so that the landlord must consider, if this person was a tenant, would the kind of behaviour that they've been involved in be serious enough for a court to make an order for possession? That's quite a high level of behaviour, and certainly the landlords will know from experience what kind of behaviour a court would consider serious enough to order possession on.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's useful. and that example you've given about a tenant setting a property on fire, that's something it's very familiar. I'm sure probably most of us, but I mean, I certainly have had a case where the property was a mid-terrace, and literally the neighbours are living in terror of this happening again, and actually their lives being at risk. So I think it is important that that the legislation is fit for purpose, and that not just for for the safety of that particular tenant, but for everybody else living around them as well. So I think it is important that that clarity is given. And we know, certainly I've had constituents contact me in the past about antisocial behaviour, and that could entail a group of kids just gathering, so it's very, very wide. So I think it is important that the words are right in law, that we're able to deal with these issues. But thank you for that.
Thanks. A couple of quick ones from me, and then I'll come quickly to Kelly, briefly to Kelly. And I suppose just picking up on Pam's point there is also, I suppose, a fear that setting fire to something is in itself a crime, and that should be, so the fear is that instead of enforcement of existing powers, that we lower the threshold and go for something different. So I just would be concerned about that. I'd also have a wee concern about how would you ensure that you're not just displacing problems into other areas. What measures are going to be taken? And I know it touches upon Mark's point there maybe as well, but the displacement issue, how's that being addressed?
It's certainly an injunction. Obviously, if a landlord seeks possession of the home and the tenant is evicted, then they will have to find alternative accommodation, and that does displace. An injunction, if it's made, could still apply to them wherever they move to. And I think that's why the injunctions are the key part of this bill, and the bit that it's most important to get right. So that will be the key function of making sure that actually if somebody is being required not to do something, or required to do positive requirements and engage, that actually that requirement is there, even if they are evicted from their current property. So that it's seeing that for what it could do if it's done right, I think is the most important part. And I appreciate, as you say, about lowering the threshold does bring a risk, but there are very, very low numbers at the moment, and I think our sense is that actually there is more that landlords would tackle if they felt that putting the resources into bringing those injunctions would have success and would help people to engage. It really is about a balance of encouraging the tenants to actually engage with services that are trying to help them to change.
Okay, and actually I should probably have declared that I am, just in relation to this, bringing forward a bill in relation to homelessness before I come to my next quick question, and also that I own a property that I derive a rental income from, so just to declare those. The briefing refers to positive engagement with support or addiction services, and we're very acutely aware of the strain that those services are under currently. So, and in particular, I have to say, the issue of dual diagnosis, where someone has both addictions and mental health problems, it can be very difficult to navigate that system. So what happens where services don't exist to the extent that perhaps compliance becomes impossible for the person? What happens in a scenario like that, or what account is being taken of that?
I think the court would have to consider when it's granting the injunction of what the requirements are. So if it's clear that there is no service that can be provided to assist them, then the court, it could be argued, shouldn't make the requirement to engage with a service that isn't available. And this is why we have to bring the focus more towards services that will support people who are having these issues. It is about making sure that there is provision available for them through supporting people and through the homelessness services. We would need to be certain that those requirements can be supplied before the requirements could be added to the injunction. Otherwise, the injunction couldn't be enforced. Okay,
so I'm going to go briefly to Kelly and briefly to Mark then, just to wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. It's just something that I wanted to pick up on. I know, Stephen, you had said about the injunction is for an existing tenant, but a landlord will be able to take a decision based on any previous evidence of unacceptable behaviour. I'm just wondering, I have a concern about children who are, adults who have become 18 who were previously maybe in a care situation, or everybody has it in every community. There's a young fella moves in somewhere, or a middle-aged man moves in somewhere on his own, doesn't have a family around him, and automatically the jungle drums are out there and say he's a paedophile, he's just come out of prison. This term that's used in that paragraph 8, there a requirement evidence of conduct which is capable of causing nuisance or annoyance. Is that the sort of thing that the language is the sort of thing that a landlord can take into account? And how could they get that evidence if the person, they haven't been a housing executive tenant, they haven't been a private landlord tenant, they've come out of a care home or their family home? Where does this evidence come from? Because if they're not a tenant already.
It's likely to come from the person's history. Quite often, people who are applying for homelessness assistance are people who have been tenants, either of social housing or in the private rented sector, and they have been forced to leave that accommodation by basically illegal action by people living in the neighbourhood who aren't prepared to tolerate their presence anymore, with the result that the person becomes homeless. Those people may present to the housing executive for assistance under homelessness legislation, but in those cases their record is going to be well known locally.
This could be a replacement for intimidation points. I have a problem where the local neighbourhood could be the boyos that just want the house for their daughter, so they say something terrible about somebody to get them out. It's that evidence I'm concerned about. Who's making the decision? It's not the courts. Who's taking that decision then? If it's
the housing executive will be taking the decision on eligibility in accordance with the legislation.
I should say as well, it's challengeable to a county court on a point of law, those eligibility decisions.
Oh yeah.
So it can't.
It's challengeable. Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mark. Please briefly.
Yeah, I was just wondering what implications there are, if any, of how we treat people coming out of prison into homelessness. Is it likely to have any or result in any changes to how that issue is dealt with currently?
The proposals don't really impact on people leaving prison, because people who have served a prison sentence, that's on the basis of their behaviour in the past. And these proposals are very much aimed at the person's ongoing current behaviour at the time the decision is taken. So it's not about looking at somebody's past, it's looking about what are they doing now at this point in time that might make them unsuitable to be a tenant. And is there any reason to believe that that behaviour is going to change? Those broadly are the things that we're expecting landlords to consider and expecting courts to consider.
Okay, thank you. And Andy's in with late indication there. Andy, if you could be brief, please.
Well, the Chair, apologies, my signal's been a bit intermittent. Firstly, can I declare an interest as a private sector landlord as well? Just in terms of this wider legislation, and indeed, like others, obviously I've had issues across my constituency office around antisocial behaviour and the inability to effectively deal with it. But has the department conducted any assessment of how effective current support services are? And I know there's been a lot of focus, but there is a feeling that there is a lack of support, so that there's a lot of emphasis here this morning on the supports and tenancy readiness. Has the department conducted any assessment as to how effective those current services are and what may be needed to increase the capacity of those services?
So we certainly know that supporting people is the prime way to access those support services, particularly for people who are homeless. And that will measure outcomes in terms of how supported people feel in terms of living independently. We do acknowledge also, obviously, the funding issues with the Supporting People programme and the adequate funding that's required to be able to expand it and to focus it more particularly on areas where there's growing need. And the Housing Executive is doing that work at the moment. So it's doing a piece of work to modernise the programme and look at what the current need assessment is. And that will can inform funding decisions about the future of the programme. So, I take the point. It does require the effectiveness of support services to be there and to have an impact on helping people and making sure that those services are available to people who need them, and we are aware of that. We're just operating in that very difficult funding environment, as you know.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just one final one, Chair. In terms of the processes currently in place and this new process, will there be a requirement for those that are taken forward before going for an injunction for them to clear out that a tenant, or clearly set out that a tenant understands the consequences of their behaviour and that an injunction may be sought?
In terms of that process that has gone through, Stephen, comments?
Well, a social landlord's method of dealing with antisocial behaviour, it's intended to be progressive, and it works through a series of stages. You're going to start off with speaking to the tenant, challenging their behaviour, issuing warnings and so forth, before you even move to court sanctions, such as injunctions. If an injunction doesn't produce the desired effect, then they may move to repossession, but that's going to be a last resort at the very end of the day, after all these other methods have been tried. So I think given that process, you can be reasonably confident that tenants are going to be aware of the consequences of their actions, and that will have been made very clear to them before further action is contemplated.
Okay, appreciate that. And just final one, Chair. Is there any best practice guidance produced? I know it will obviously be ultimately up to each individual organisation, whether it's housing executive or housing association, but are you aware of a best practice guidance that has been produced as to a uniform approach to this?
The department does in fact issue quite detailed guidance to the housing executive on dealing with antisocial behaviour. And as far as the housing associations are concerned, I think we're in the process of implementing that.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
All right, Andy. Thank you. Okay, so listen, appreciate the evidence today. I have to say, I think I agree with Mark. This is important legislation, and these are issues that do impact on communities. There's no question about it. However, this is potentially quite intrusive legislation as well, and hugely impactful in that sense. So I would have to say that going forward, that'll certainly be something that I'll be very keen to understand and have a better understanding of. As this, I appreciate this is a pre-legislative, and I appreciate that you've said that there are issues there that you will take on board and take back. But for now, thank you for your attendance here today, and we'll no doubt be talking to you again in due course. Thank you both. All the best.
Thank you.
Good luck. So members, can I just check there if there's any further actions arising out of today's briefing that members wish to flag up, or at this point, given it's pre-legislative, it'll be coming back to us. Go ahead, Kelly.
Would it be useful to maybe ask Ray's for a paper on the comparators of what they're proposing across England, Scotland, Wales and in the south? Just so we have that in advance of
I think it certainly, I think it would. I think information's key. Andy, you have a hand raised there?
Yeah, Chair, could we maybe write to the housing executive and each of the associations to ask them to set out how they currently approach dealing with ASB, what their process is?
Yeah, is that a briefing from them, Andy?
I would say written at this stage, obviously, this is the pre-stuff, but unless colleagues want to bring them in, but I think written would suffice at this stage.
Well, members content with Andy's proposal? Yeah. And with Kelly's proposal? Okay. Okay, thank you, members. Yep, you content, Clerk, yeah. Okay, members, so we'll move on then to our next agenda item, and this is agenda item 5. We're moving, or sorry, 6, moving to funding for social housing, and we're taking oral evidence now from the Federation of Housing Associations. The briefing paper for the agenda item is page 28 of members' packs, and I'd now like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. So we're joined by Seamus Leheny. Seamus is Chief Executive of the Federation of Housing Associations. Michael Rafferty, who is Group Director of Finance and Resources for Choice Housing Ireland. Jan Sloan. Jan is Director of Development for Clanmil. Barry Kerr, who's Director of Development and Assets with Apex Housing Association, and Anita Conway, Director of Development with Radius. So certainly the right panel in the sense of the people who are very, very expert in this. I am conscious with the amount of you that there may be potential for overlap. So if I could ask when we come to members' questions, if a member leads and if members just add something that's different or additional or contrary to what someone has said, just so that we can manage the session. But Seamus, I think it's yourself who's going to make an opening statement, and then we'll come to questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today on the critical state of housing in Northern Ireland. As Chair pointed out, I'm Seamus Leheny, Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations. Our sector owns and manages over 63,000 homes across all of Northern Ireland. And last year, in partnership with the Department for Communities, our members completed 1,410 new social homes. We commenced work on 1,504 new social homes, and we provided 886 new homes through co-ownership. So I'm joined here this morning by 4 colleagues from 4 different housing associations who are experts in the development and finance of social housing, and they'll introduce themselves to you shortly. And we're currently facing a housing emergency. As of late 2025, the social housing waiting list has climbed to nearly 50,000 households. Even more concerning is that over 38,000 of those are in housing stress. That means they're living in potentially unsafe, overcrowded or unsuitable conditions. Homelessness has reached unprecedented levels. In the last decade, the number of households with official homelessness status has more than doubled, now exceeding 32,000. And behind those figures are families stuck in temporary accommodation, often for years, with a record number of children growing up without a permanent home, estimated around about 5,000. And as the recent PAC report, which I put in the briefing paper last week, outlined, the cost of that temporary accommodation provision has grown substantially year on year. So why are we here today? Well, we're here to talk to you about the changes to how we finance and build those critically needed homes. I want to acknowledge, we realise public finances are stretched. Money's hard to come by in a lot of departments right across the economy. The status quo can't remain the same. We have to evolve. That's what our sector does, and we have a successful record of delivery and how we deliver and sustain those homes. The critical thing I will point out to the committee today is that this has to be done in partnership. So changes apply with us, not at us. We can't risk our sector's viability as an attractive sector to invest in for private finance. Our sector is highly successful in utilising public finances and private finance, so much so it's a record of success. It's envied in GB and down south in Ireland. They look at the way we utilise those public grants and money we can raise from banks, etc., to deliver what is in essence a public asset, that's social housing. I suppose there's an example of when you squeeze that, when you tip the balance too far, and I'll not go into it in great detail, but in England, the grant rate was cut to well below 20%, and housing associations could only keep building when they prioritised housing for sale. And what that actually delivered then is that housing associations reduced the output of social homes. They were building more homes for private rent, private sale, in order to sustain themselves. And that was something basically that was often looked at in Scotland as well. In Scotland, they cut grant rates to an extent where it became unviable for housing associations to build, where they then simply stopped developing new homes. So the consequences, what we need to make sure we avoid, we need to make sure we retain the viability. We need to make sure we're still an attractive sector to lend money to. We've got to be conscious as well that 30% of our tenants pay their rent themselves, not using any form of benefits. So what we do, we risk adding to rent unaffordability, but also creating mono-tenure. What we don't want to do is make social housing so expensive where some people will just think they'll go to the private sector. The homes might not be as good a quality, but they might try and save money. So we need to avoid that. We need to make sure that people living in social housing, we have a whole mix of people who live within those areas. The good news is, by the end of this month, we should be well on course to achieving the target of 1,750 new home starts for this financial year. So that's really down to the good work of the likes of the people beside me and the rest of our members, our colleagues within the Department for Communities and the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. So I think we should all be very proud of that. But the start figures, when broken down, will tell the impact of the recent changes to the grant rates, because when we look at the approvals, when we're looking at that 1750 figure that we're likely to achieve this year, the number of schemes approved before the new HAG rates came into place on the 1st of December, we had around about 1,300 units were put in. In fact, so we had 18 schemes comprising of 999 units were submitted for, they were awaiting project approval right up to the wire on the 1st of December. Afterwards, post 1st of December, there was 4 schemes totaling 54 units were then submitted between the 1st of December and up until about the middle of January. So it shows there was a huge climb, and then we dropped off. And that shows you something about, basically, and my colleagues here can go into greater detail about why they had to do that. So the challenges of delivering social housing will be over 26, 27 and the following year. But as a sector, we will remain positive, and through proper collaboration between all parties, including ourselves, the department, the housing executive, we aim to deliver the minimum 33,000 new social homes by 2039, as outlined in the Executive's Housing Supply Strategy launched last year. The way I look at it, the Housing Supply Strategy is the scaffolding for us achieving that figure, which is going to average out around about a minimum 2,200 new social homes per annum. The department has commenced 2 reviews running parallel that are aiming to conclude by the end of September, October of this year, so a very tight time frame. These are 2 reviews we welcome. We've talked to the Minister, to the department about this, and we realise these reviews are needed. That's something we're actively working in as well. The first review is the subsidy review. That's going to look at about how we sustainably fund social housing for the years ahead. And then the other one is the design review, how we build those very homes, how we reduce barriers and costs where possible. So to sum up, really, collectively, we have this unique window of opportunity that we can't afford to miss now this year with these 2 reviews. We must ensure the unique experience and knowledge, including that of my sector colleagues seated beside me today, of being the sole delivery agents of social and affordable housing for the past 30 years, in partnership with the government and private finance, is fully listened to, is considered and incorporated into both review outcomes, because the solutions must be fit for purpose for all partners, ourselves and for government. The public who critically need these homes are relying on all of us to get this right now. We can't keep, we can't kick this down the line. We can't even afford to get this wrong now, because God knows when we'll get the opportunity again to address this. So my sector colleagues beside me here today, they're involved in both of these reviews and sitting on the working groups, and I'll now take this opportunity to pass you over to them for a brief introduction from each of them before discussing the issues at hand as well as all the solutions with each of you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Anita, if you want to start.
Thank you all very much for inviting us here today. My name is Anita Conway and I'm the Director of Development with Radius Housing Association. We would have about 14,000 homes. This year we hope to commence about 400, but as Seamus said, that is very much because of the timing and because of the work that we've done over the last number of years. We hope to complete just under 300 new homes to bring those into completion as well. As an organisation, we have do more than just the housing management side of things. We have a care side of things as well. So big range of what we do.
Again, thank you for having us here today. My name is Barry Kerr. I'm the Executive Director of Development and Assets at Apex. Not as big as Radius, but we would have just over 7,000 homes at Apex, and then including supported living schemes in that as well. We're in quite a similar position to Radius at this time, in that we'll aim to deliver 400 homes in this year's social housing development programme. But again, a lot of that, the majority of 380 of that is because they're have been long-term commitments with significant costs and expenditure already committed to those schemes. But it is next year that, unfortunately, we will probably most likely, if things don't change, have a very, very small development programme. But yeah, that's
Thank you,
an overview of the Apex.
Yeah, so I'm Michael Rafferty, the Group Director of Finance and Resources at Choice Housing. We have around 14,000 properties, and over the last 4 years or so, we've tried to produce about 400 new social units every year. And I suppose in my role as finance director in Choice, I can maybe share with you my experience around why the new grant regime is very problematic from our point of view in terms of the viability of individual schemes, but also the impact on the wider financial position of the housing associations, and I'll also maybe give you maybe a perspective in terms of what's happening in the funding market and so on. So hopefully I'll be able to give you some useful information today.
You?
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Jan Sloan. I'm the Executive Director of Development and New Business for Clanmil Housing. We have just over 6,000 homes across Northern Ireland, across a multitude of different tenure types. And similar to my colleagues here, our aspiration in terms of our strategic ambition this year was to start 400 new homes. We do feel we are on target for that, subject to the wider grant funding. But again, similarly, a lot of that was effort that was put in before the 1st of December to ensure that those schemes that we were progressing, where commitments had been made, particularly to those communities that we'd been engaging with to deliver homes within that they are waiting on, that to keep those viable, we had to get them in before the 1st of December, and it was a much smaller number of schemes that were submitted post the 1st of December. So it's a watch and see space at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. And there's a couple of things there, I suppose. First of all, I do really want to welcome the indication that the 1750 homes for this year will be met. There was a bit of a concern, given that a low number had been reported in the first 3 quarters. However, I also take on board the message that that's potentially linked to the changes in the scheme and things being brought forward, and the real threat may come in next year and subsequent years, so we'll come back to that. But I also want to indicate, I also want to welcome a sense that there's more communication between yourselves and the department and those reviews and things, because that's something that the committee was very keen on previously, that there would be close working with yourselves, given you the important role you play within that sector. So appreciate that. Your paper points to a mismatch between ambition and viability, however, particularly in high stress areas. And the committee wants to understand whether current policy is genuinely unlocking supply or potentially unintentionally constraining it going forward. The housing supply strategy sets a target of 33,000 new homes by 2039, but your paper suggests that the current funding model may undermine viability in areas of greatest need. So what's your assessment of the gap between the headline target and what is realistically delivering under the current grant arrangement?
I suppose I'll hand over to some of my colleagues here who are, facing this in their days. But for us, yeah, you're right. When we looked at the figures, we had to do a health check last year, and we, in the briefing paper given to you last week, we got summer accountants to look at the pipeline of schemes that all members had. These are schemes almost like shelf ready to get going on. And when they did the sums and that, it came out around about nearly half of the pipeline would be deemed financially unviable if you were to build at that given point in time. So I'll hand over, I suppose, Anita, if you want to maybe give some examples.
Thank you. We did some working outs when the new figures came in, so maybe just to give you a couple of sort of high-level figures to help. In a scheme in North Belfast, it was a £17,000 per unit difference in reduction in HAG. So that was significant, and that wouldn't have been viable had we not been able to put it on in the new project, as an example. Newton Ards, there was a small scheme, 21, it's £25,000 per unit. So if you're, it's those sort of type of figures that you're talking about. And a small scheme in West Belfast, it was 35k. I will say that also includes some innovation grants. We do some EPCA, which we would include in that, and some other innovations, because those have been removed as well. So that would have taken all of those out. So it's not all, just to be clear. HAG variation. So it's really that Belfast, Newton Ards, Lisburn, Castlereagh area that has been hit the most, I would say. In certain areas, Coleraine, there's a slight increase or sort of neutral position from that. But those figures are based on what it was previously, not in where costs are as well. So just to say that that's the type of figures that we were talking about.
And can you crystallise that into have you looked at the overall impact that may have in terms of housing units going forward?
It's more probably to do with if it comes now, and some of my other colleagues will speak as well, you may just then say it's not it's not viable, so you don't progress some of those, because the other issue is, what does the rent level have to be for us to pay back that increased loan? And there is a bit of a moral issue as well in terms of we're providing social and affordable housing. So there is that when we're looking at it. There's more and more projects that we're turning down on viability in certain areas.
And given that the briefing paper argues that reducing the average grant from 54.2 to 46.8, that makes an assumption that associations can just simply borrow more to make up the shortfall. What are we to understand in terms of what would need to give in that situation in practice? Are we looking at fewer units, higher rents, reduced maintenance, or increased financial risks? And is the evidence at this point in time indicating that that borrowing is available to housing associations, or that housing associations may struggle?
If I could come in there on the borrowing side. So yes, housing associations do it is a mixed funded model, partial grant and partial private borrowing. There are constraints on the amount of private borrowing that can be undertaken. There's probably two main ones that probably haven't been talked about so much in all of this, but under the 54% average grant rate, the schemes are just about viable in the sense that an affordable rent, less revenue costs, less an allowance for long-term maintenance costs, less interest, just about balances out okay, as in terms of close to break even, maybe a small contingency sum for future risk. Okay, so when you move that from 54% down to 46% or even 42% in Belfast, what was previously a scheme that just about washed its face, that becomes a negative cash flow scheme. Okay, now you could do lots of figure work around this, and yes, associations may decide out of their own resources to fund a limited number of schemes like that in the short term. But overall, you need a grant scheme or a grant system that works. And while associations at the moment are viewed positively by funders in terms of and the funders really essentially are looking at two things: compliance with financial covenants, in other words, does our net cash flow cover our interest payments? And secondly, they're looking at collateral. These changes have a negative impact on both of those things. So ultimately, if you do lots and lots of schemes that are not covering their interest, eventually that will catch up and damage and significantly damage the overall viability of the organisation itself. And the second point is around collateral. If you're putting more debt onto each new house that you build, then ultimately that house does not have sufficient collateral value to cover itself. So the association then is having to find other sources of collateral from its other housing stock. I don't think there are too many housing associations that have huge pools of unused collateral at the moment. So there are very significant financial constraints around this, and ultimately, you really need a sustainable model for the funders, the banks, the pension funds, others like EIB that we introduced into the sector a few years ago. They need to see a viable funding model for them to continue to have confidence in the sector. So I do worry that the changes that have been introduced would have a negative impact on that.
So are you saying, Michael, that this is not a sustainable model? And if that's the case, are you in any discussion or negotiation with the department around it?
Well, I'm actually the NIFHA representative on the Subsidy Review Working Group, and our remit is effectively to produce recommendations towards a sustainable funding model, and I'll be working closely with both the department and the Housing Executive with that aim. And we do need, all of us need a sustainable funding model for this all to work. Otherwise the system will, unfortunately, grind to a halt over time.
Okay, thank you. And we'll go to Kelly, then Melissa, then Pam.
Thank you very much, folks. Michael, I'm glad to hear that you're on that group. I know that you've presented to us before about how the mechanism for funding and how that works, and it was very useful. Can I ask a question, first of all, of the areas that you have applied or are applying to build homes using the HAG? We know that there's a differential across Northern Ireland. Some areas are higher than others. Have you looked at how those allocations are happening at the moment by the Housing Executive? Is it in the areas where the HAG's the lower rate or the higher rate? Is there any balancing out on that at the moment?
Looking at it, Kelly, cost group A, which has the lowest HAG rate, has two of the areas with the highest housing need. You know, you got you got Belfast there, encompassing North and West Belfast. You got Lisburn, Castlereagh. So I suppose, you know, when we're looking at Belfast here, there's the highest housing need, but it's going to become one of the least affordable areas to grow in. Places like, you know, Derry City and Strabane, Mid and East Antrim, etc., in the mid tier. And then when the costs were the grants most generous, Armagh City, Banbridge, Craigavon, Causeway Coast and Glens, Fermanagh, Omagh, probably not so much strain there. There's still some pockets of where there obviously is a need for housing there, but certainly, and you know, maybe I'll let the others come in here, the areas where you'd be looking to build the large-scale developments, you know, and houses in the hundreds, not in the dozens, they're probably the areas most affected here.
Okay, so I'm a bit concerned about that because it seems to be not following what we need in Northern Ireland. It's flipped it round, you know, it's the least beneficial or the areas where we have the highest need. I have concerns about that, yeah. Sorry, did anybody else want to come in on that one? Okay. Can I just ask as well, developer contributions, whatever comes forward with that, the HAG at the moment doesn't seem to take into consideration that additional cost that may be required. So if you could have a development, say you managed to get land in Belfast and there was the potential of building 200 houses there, which would be very, very welcome, believe me, with the housing lists. The developer contributions in order to get that connected would probably have to be paid by yourselves as the developers. But the HAG doesn't take that into account. Does that mean it wipes out any potential?
We are in a bit of a perfect storm at the moment in terms of developer contributions in relation to NI Water. Yeah. So even small schemes are registering unviable at the moment because of developer contributions, purely because you're talking. We have an example of a scheme of 12 units in North Belfast where the developer contribution is estimated to be £500,000 for 12 units. Then you're met with the reduction in grant. You're met then also with a recent increase in NIE costs, connection costs of 123%. Michael touched on that ability, or reduced ability potentially to borrow, and the constraints there. But you've also we've had 6 years of rising construction costs. Out of line with inflation in some cases, particularly with labour costs and that. Now we're facing an additional layer of constraint with the fuel costs. So the schemes that we have now today that are starting, we hope to start on site. They've just been tendered in January of 2026, and already we've got contractors approaching us saying we can no longer stand over those costs. So it is a bit of a perfect storm at the moment, which it did feel like the reduction in grant then just came as an additional punch, excuse for want of a better phrase, and in that. So yeah, I don't feel the HAG calculations and how it was considered factored in, or does factor in any of those other constraints that we have.
I don't want to put the market down, but I'm just wondering, has there been any, have you had to have difficult conversations with lenders, those other lenders out there? I've attended different events, where we've heard the support, of course, that comes in the banking sector towards yourselves because they're able to clean their money because a lot of your houses are environmentally friendly. It's a good thing, it's social value, but there must come a point when they say, extending the life of a debt is possibly the only way forward. But has it become unviable for them? I
mean, the lenders are, one of the main things they look to is the grant regime that we have, which has been a really successful model in Northern Ireland. And they would be concerned that if we make that a less sustainable funding model, frankly, they will stop lending. Now, we're not at that stage yet, and we're far from it. The banks and other funders continue to be very supportive and view this sector as very favourably, and I would hope they will continue to lend. But unless there is a sustainable grant model, that could change.
My last question, Anita, you talked about the design of homes up to EPC-A, and to be honest, having been out at private development where they have EPC-AA is when you get you're creating energy. I don't like the fact that we could be looking towards social homes being built at a lesser standard than the private sector. I know that there's talk about design standards and removing the all of life standards and all this here. Is this going to be a race to the bottom on design standards, or are you prepared to take that hit in order to make affordable homes, but affordable homes that will have fuel poverty?
So there's a couple of things on that. On the EPCA projects that we already had them in for planning. So we as an organisation decided that we would continue to do EPCA. I'll be going back to my board in the new year to look at costs and see whether we can deliver them, because it's not just the cost of construction, it's the cost of maintenance over the life cycle. But we're in a position where affordability and fuel poverty doesn't look like it's going to get a lot better anytime soon, so there is an obligation. We've actually been looking at batteries and things. Can we do better than what we're doing? The issue for us and my colleagues, we want to build social homes. We want to build really good social homes, and we want to build them because we maintain them as well to be very good. But there's a certain point with everything that you have to look at what you can do. So at the minute, we've taken a decision that we will continue to do it. But I suppose we need to see, this year, as I say, we were already committed. We would have had to put in for planning, we wouldn't have got them on site. So there's lots of different reasons, but we're also very committed to sustainability within the organisation. And I think this is some of the challenges that we're facing. Maybe controversially, I would rather have that than some of the other things in terms of secure by design or lifetime home that we're requested to do, because I look as that tenant. I think having a warm, safe home is more important than, maybe a wee bit of future proofing that may or may not happen. But I think those are some of the hard decisions on top of everything else that we're doing. I also think we as an organisation or as a sector should be innovative, and we should be leading from that. And I think that's where we maybe will not be able to do that as much.
Yeah.
Can I just say thank you for the 1,750 homes. It's still below our housing supply targets. We're not meeting that, haven't met it since it started, but thank you for the work that you guys are doing. Sorry.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Thank you, Rove. Alig, agus is jazz who loves you. You're all very welcome. It's nice meeting with you as well too, because I'm able to put a face now to people that I've actually talked to on the phone and things like it at times there. Just in relation to your own report and that where you said that roughly half of the planned housing schemes will no longer be financially viable. And to what extent have you had discussions with the department in relation to that? Because they're sort of like, in a way, dismissing your report.
Yeah, we had those conversations. I suppose what we had to do, the new rates were conveyed to us on the 23rd of October last year. We were told they would become effective then about 6 weeks later. So we quickly, what we did, I got, like I said earlier on, I got the pipeline. Anita, Jan, Barry all give me their pipeline of work, and so did the other development. There's about 12 housing associations that are actively building homes every year. So they give me whether they had one scheme planned or they had 30 schemes planned. They give me all the details, and what they did a comparison on the old rates and the new rates to come into effect on the 1st of December. And like what Michael talked about there, about basically the affordability on that element, then it came down to basically the analysis, what we had our third-party accountants look at, saying would this be deemed as financially viable or not. Now, financially viable, that then comes down to an individual decision by each association. There might be a scheme and they may have bought the land in advance, they may have made commitments to local community to deliver those homes. They could take the decision, you know what, this scheme isn't financially viable, but we have to take a strategic decision whether to continue and build these and try and get the money in somehow to cover this here. But really, when we look down at it, I suppose, and I'll let some of them come in here, yes, on a plain black and white, half the schemes were coming in that you would class them as not viable, that if you were planning them long term, you wouldn't build them there at that style.
Well, to say all politics is local, and I know that you alluded to earlier on, Derry City and Staban council area has been sort of mid-table in a sense. So where are we at in terms of, we'll say, the projects that will hopefully be in the pipeline, we'll say, for the Derry City and Staban area?
Yeah, I'm going to take that one. Well, I don't want to predetermine a planning application outcome this afternoon, but we have a couple of very big schemes that we're hoping to have approved this afternoon. But they're land that we own. They're developments on land that we own. So we're faced with the challenge that we've made such a financial commitment to them in the past few years with consultant fees, planning fees, etc. Never mind the interest that we're paying on the land, that we had to start an element of it. However, that's because we've made those financial commitments. There's other schemes in the Derry, the Strabane area, particularly in the rural areas, where there's smaller schemes that it's not for the want of trying. They're just not financially viable. And in terms of we've all operated in previous years on a long-term cash flow period of 35 years, when our net rent exceeds our interest payments, our loan repayments. And all of us, I don't believe there's probably anyone across the table here that would be below 45 years, maybe not even below 50 or 55 years in terms of trying to make a clawback on a scheme. And a scheme is just constantly making a loss. Yeah, and when you multiply that,
it's worth mentioning. It's not that we're sort of saying, well, we wouldn't take on a scheme because it doesn't pay back in 40 years. These schemes at these grant levels will never pay back. They are cash negative from day one. That negative cash then continues to build up, and with compound interest, you're actually borrowing more money all the way through the scheme. So you're borrowing money to build it, and then you're having to subsidise all the way through. Now, you don't have to do too many schemes like that before you're going to be in trouble.
That's the critical point.
Yeah.
There.
Well, just to make the comment that coming from probably the most rural of our rural areas, myself, and the Castlederg and the Derg Valley, it's disappointing to hear that as well too. There are very often schemes in the areas like my own that there are not going to be financially viable even in the long term. So is there anything that we, even as MLAs and that, can do in order to maybe attempt to retrieve the situation there?
I think I'd come back, it's the subsidy review this year. I think really, as a committee, basically, I've made it clear that, we've got our representatives on the project group, but, they're not the final decision makers on this. You're going to have people, from the department, the housing executive, SIB, making the final recommendations. And we just need to make sure that basically the final recommendation that goes to Minister is that it encompasses the views and the realities of the sector fully, because otherwise we're wasting our time with this here. We've got to get it right this time round to make it work.
And I just come in on that. I do feel there may also be an opportunity now, especially with events in the Middle East, that warrant a review before April 27 of the Hague funding. If we recall back in 2021, when inflation rose significantly as a result of COVID, there was a mid-year review of grant rate, TCI and grant rates, and then there was also additional support by way of a procurement advisory note that they're referred to as PAN claims. Now, we're not here today asking for an additional PAN claim, but I do feel that with the events in the Middle East, if fuel costs continue to stay where they're at right now, it would warrant, it is a significant event that would warrant an interim or mid-year review of the current position and not wait to April 2027, because I think you may find that by the end of the summer, if we were to look at what schemes are viable or deliverable for the year 26-27, it could be quite stark, and we want to try and maybe get ahead of that now. To allow the sector to mobilise and get schemes put forward for funding approval and even through the planning process if required.
Thank you. Okay, so listen, I have a few members now indicating, so I'd ask members to be as succinct and panel as succinct as possible, please. I have Pam, Mark and Sian still looking in. Go ahead, Pam.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you all for your time here at committee today. It's clearly a very complex issue, and I do thank you, each of you, for all your efforts and striving forward and trying to muddy through what is a very complex issue. But of course we know how important it is that we get our housing stock up where it needs to be, because we are at critical levels, and it impacts across all housing tenures. Your ability to build will have knock-on positive or negative impact on other tenures as well. So do appreciate that work you're doing. You may be aware that this committee has written to the executive to support the earmarking of the full funding to allow the social housing house building plans to go ahead. So my question to you would be, based on the draft budget that's sitting there and the lack of funding towards that building, and that I think it's less than half would be built under that proposal. What impact would that have on each of your organisations and your ability to deliver in terms of house builds in future years?
Right. Thanks for that. I think it's much more strategic. I think development is very live. The biggest concern that we have is that it's the confidence with our developer partners. You know, we need them to be bringing forward land. We need them to be there. They need to have a workforce. They need to be investing in apprenticeships, training people, replenishing our workforce. When there is uncertainty, a lot of time and effort on our parts across our sector is about actually keeping that motivation, around keeping the faith that, you know, because we do believe money will come. It may be not be where we are looking it to be, but something will come, because we just simply can't turn the tap off on building houses, because it's hugely difficult to actually turn it back on again, and more costly because contractors are having to mobilise. So at a strategic level, and we totally understand, you know, it is a constrained budget. There isn't money that we need to do everything, and this is about prioritising. I suppose we would come from the space of, we feel that housing for social rented is actually strategically important to Northern Ireland PLC. It supports those people in need of a home. It supports our construction sector. There's employability. It's that economic investment. When that gets turned off, or our developer partners, and we are seeing this is live at this point in time, you know, they have staff who have mortgages to pay. They're looking to where the work actually is and where there's certainty of that pipeline for them. So they're going across into GB, or they're going down south, or they're in, you know, in Dundalk or in Donegal. So we're seeing almost a construction drain outwards, getting that back and having it ready. So if there was a magic wand and there was money here in a year's time, there is still a risk that we mightn't have actually the people here to deliver on those aspirations and ambitions. So it is a lot of work with our contractor partners around keeping confidence, working with our colleagues in the Housing Executive and the Department for Communities too, in terms of everybody understanding that. And this is where I suppose we have very much welcomed the opportunity to participate in those two review groups, to have that voice, to understand the wider complexities, that it isn't just saying put more money in. That would be great, but it isn't just about that. This is about collaboration and partnership and understanding the ripple effect and unintended consequences that can come from that, so that can be forewarned, and we can actually start to plan to how we address that, to ensure that pipeline, not just for next year, but into the next 2, 3, because I think the one thing we're certain of, waiting lists aren't going to be coming down anytime soon. They're going to continue to rise as well.
And if I say very quickly, Pam, I think what's good is, well, what we did welcome with the draft budget is that we've been calling for a long time for the multi-year budget, to give Jan, you know, and the rest of them that pipeline, that certainty. And it's touching on like what Barry said a while ago, because I think the problem, you touched on the global economics thing, you know, the Strait of Hormuz, the problems there, that's going to affect on the economy here in the months ahead. It's a bit like if we turn off the house building here for these guys, it's a bit like stopping an oil tanker and trying to turn it around. It'll take a long time if we stop work or scale down work to try and get it back up to the figures, 2,200 plus per annum, to get up again. So that a certainty of a budget that Jan mentioned and creating that pipeline is welcome, but we just need to make sure the amount of money earmarked for that multi-year budget is sufficient, because otherwise we're around again to the monitoring rounds, which creates uncertainty again.
Yeah, thank you. And further,
you know, that's very useful. It's clear that that certainty is required. The funding levels are one thing, but the timeliness of it and knowing it's going to be there, so that you can plan and work through all those complexities. My other question would be in terms of water infrastructure. So, say in the ideal world, you get all the money you need to build houses. In terms of the housing supply strategy and those particular targets, what risk is there in terms of the water infrastructure piece of not being able to fulfil?
We take that one then. That's just, I think that's a huge risk. I think it's one of the things now, viability in certain areas, and NI water is the first question that we ask. And it's whether there's an NI water solution, albeit it might have a cost that we talked about earlier, or if you're in North Belfast, they're not looking at it until 2035. So you just don't look at anything in those areas because you can't make it work. And I think that's a difficulty because that's an area of humongous housing need, and we can do nothing to do it. And there are sites that are deliverable there, really good sites. So I think that's the issue, that even if we had all the money, there has to be that infrastructure has to come along with us. And we talked earlier about EPCA. There's also capacity issues, that if we suddenly said everything was going to be EPCA, there's not capacities within our system. So there is other work that has to come along. But we have found a lot of solutions in what we've developed over the last few years. I think there's less and less solutions now. I think that's the issue. So we do need to be doing more to try and free up some of those areas for development. So it is a real challenge, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, go ahead, please.
And thanks to the team for coming along. I'd echo other members' regards and sentiments in terms of my appreciation of the role that you play and the work that you do. Now, this might seem a daft question, maybe it is a daft question, but what actually constitutes a start on units? And the funding, I suppose, that was allocated to social housing development in the last monitoring round, it has enabled this flurry of starts, if you like, or avalanche of starts. Is that intended then to be enough to see these projects through to completion? Or how does that accounting mechanism work?
I'll take that one. There's no real exact science behind this. A start is simply a start when you've entered the contract. But yes, our understanding of how the budgeting is for that is that it is over the life of what it's going to cost to deliver that. We get our upfront land acquisition and a start on site element of whatever that grant funding is, and then over the life, so it comes almost in its largest chunk at the entering of the contract form. Usually, I think my colleagues would say, on the 31st of March every year. We would love that to be different, but that speaks to Seamus's point around a 3-year budget. But yes, it will include for sort of those in-year commitments each year that they, for practical completion costs and grant element that need to be paid over that. So we understand it can be complex in terms of just trying to budget ahead of that. But if you've got a good year, for example, and then there isn't that confirmed budget coming through, that's where it's sort of the starts target can be very variable year on year, as opposed to hitting the targets that we're all trying to work towards.
Yeah, and obviously a multi-year budget will be helpful in that regard, but only again if it's right from the start, because you spoke there about the, I suppose, uncertainty around monitoring rounds. I think as we enter, hopefully, this multi-year process, one drawback is there's still uncertainty around how monitoring rounds will look, and whereas you have been dependent on that kind of hand-to-mouth budgeting, it's come in handy in parts where capital can't be spent elsewhere, but at least you're getting it surrendered in a timely enough fashion. It should be timelier. Do you fear that if you go on the multi-year budget, that opportunity might be lost?
I still think they probably still have the opportunity, Mark, in as much as whatever the budget is, unless they give us totally for the 2,200, and that is probably unlikely, then there still are opportunities. When we're doing it as a sector, we would have an awful lot more that we're working on than what we do to try and meet those targets. So if I was trying to do 350, 400, I'd be trying to work on 600 plus, because things fall away or there's delays. So sometimes when there is that upside, I think then we could still manage it. I think it's more that when we're planning over a 3-year programme, from staffing, from buying sites, from engaging, and when we're doing it, we just have much more fluidity between that to be able to deliver and to develop, and you could have different years. So I think that's where it would really work for us. But I'm sure if there was extra money come along, we'd be doing our best to absolutely help to spend that.
I think maybe if I could
and
add.
finally, just, oh sorry, was someone else?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, I think it also speaks to ambition, ambition for all of us in terms of, you know, we have a target, we all appreciate that within the programme for government and the housing supply strategy, but we should also recognise that year on year, to Kelly's point, it hasn't been met. So we are year on year creating a deficit on where we wanted those numbers to actually be. So certainty of budget, and a budget that is proportionate and relevant to what we are here to do, is and should be a focus, so that we can actually start to pare some of that back to meet the housing supply that we haven't been in a position to be able to do, and to speak to that ambition that we have. So it would be good to have even more certainty, and then indeed if there were sort of those opportunities where there were monitoring rounds, if that money was available and we were confident that it could come to housing, that we could then use that to maybe bring forward windfall opportunities year on year.
Thank you.
Wait, and finally, the Minister has assured me recently that there is progress being made in terms of the identification of public land and how maybe that can be allocated or identified and used for social housing. Are you aware of any progress in this regard, and do you see, or have you been approached about playing a role in maybe identifying suitable sites and suitable locations?
There is that we are aware to some degree, Mark, in that a lot of the public land will come to us via a nomination for transfer site, as we would refer to it as, from the housing executive. So that has been going on now for quite some time, and we have seen, you know, there's peaks and troughs and what comes and what doesn't come, if you like. But I suppose to answer your question, that it doesn't appear, from what I can see, to have been a surge in identifying the public land that's available or indeed coming our way. But even at that, public land is still going to be subject to an LPS valuation. We're still going to be paying market value for that land. And we've got one example, again, it just happens to be in North Belfast between two tower blocks, that there's a strategy in place to take down those two tower blocks. And I had to meet with community stakeholders just last week to explain to them how the scheme that will sit between those two tower blocks is no longer financially viable. And it's not largely down to, even if we got the site for free, it still isn't financially viable. Sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. To answer your question, no, we haven't seen a massive surge in public land being identified, or certainly haven't been consulted on it.
Okay. Thank you. And Sian, please.
Yeah, thanks. Part of my question was just answered. It was around that the recognition of particularly public land and how that's brought forward as a rural MLA. That's something that's brought up to me quite a bit, with people literally emailing to say they know that a piece of land is owned by a particular department. I'm just wondering, given that you've said there hasn't been much movement on that, what is the process at the minute? And have there been many successful transfers or nominations of transfers over the last wee while that you can maybe give us an example of?
I'm happy to take that. There are some examples. We had a big scheme in Bangor that was very successful. I think the issue is that they're becoming smaller, certainly from my knowledge. They're not always the most easily to develop sites. Okay. And then LPS have certain rules and regulations that they have to comply with, and that can present some issues in terms of negotiation for what they think the valuation is and what we think the valuation is. So sometimes it's a challenging project to do, but we have one in West Belfast this year that were banned from the council. So there are some that come through, but I wouldn't say they're the easiest or the best value for money in terms of what we would do, but we would still welcome, because at the same time a lot of it's in areas where there is some need. Going back onto the rural question, it is challenging to get the sites, and then it's challenging to get the site that will have the need. So if there's a need for 6 and the site can do 15, there's a real issue then in how you take that forward, and even being able to buy it for a second phase, or to look at, sometimes we do private houses or affordable ownership houses there. Again, that ties into the viability of can we do it. But all of us would look at those solutions, certainly if a site comes across We want to develop. That you have to take that from us. We want to develop. We want to provide quality social homes. Just sometimes it's just not practical for us to be able to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Listen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sian. It's been a very, very packed schedule, and I want to not allow this session to go past without some reference to design standard, and there's been less of a focus on that. I have to say, as a social worker, it was desperately frustrating at times to see the impact of poor planning and design in terms of the impact on people's lives, should they suffer a disability, or should their age just mean that they need a very simple, often what would have been very simple and very cost effective in the design and build stage to put in place, and then becomes a huge issue around retrofitting, people having to move out of their homes, the impact in terms of their lives and health, and also the cost that has. So to me, it's hugely important that we are future-proofing our housing stock to ensure that they're disability friendly, and also the lifetime home standards will be maintained. So I understand your perspective on that, and that you're seeking to build as cost effectively as possible, but do you recognise the concern around reductions in design standards now could lead to huge cost and a disadvantage in subsequent years?
I think I'll pass over to Jan's on that review group, but I would say as well, to adapt homes, the money used to adapt social housing at the moment comes out of the new build programme budget. So obviously it's in all of our interests not have to adapt homes in the future, build them right now, and then we save money later down the road. And I actually just had a visit about 2 weeks ago from my counterparts in England, Scotland and Wales, and we brought them on a site visit here, and they were hugely impressed by the way we build homes here, how they are suitable for people if their circumstances change as well. But Jan, I suppose you're on that.
Yes, I am on the design, and I suppose the starting point on that is that design is a red line. Good quality design and place shaping has to be fundamental. This is social housing. We are also landlords. We want people to feel proud of where they live, and I think and to have pride of place in where they are, so that they can thrive and flourish when they're living there. And we are making that long-term investment, and we're paying back debt on that. So of course we don't want transients being built in, and that can be accommodated through good quality design. Absolutely concur with your point. This is about making sure that homes are usable into that long term, and we're not seeing people having to move away, because that's only perpetuating a waiting list. I suppose part of the review group, which hasn't been, it hasn't really, we've had a first sort of informal discussion around how that's going to be captured going forward. It's to look at it practically. It isn't about cutting corners, and I don't think any of us would want to be there. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do. This is about future-proofing it. It is looking at where it is feasible. The outcome may be it just simply isn't, if we want to deliver quality housing stock that people can live well in. But there may be opportunities just to consider some of those other bolt-ons that do come our way. I think the one that gets the focus is more around the gold standard level of secured by design, which our lived experience has been that is turning our housing schemes almost into prisons at times, through no fault of anybody, but it's almost as if we're designing out crime by designing people in, and they can't move. So there is likely to be cost savings. It's about correlating that alongside what changes are coming up in building regulations, good and bad. How do we do it well in that one arena, rather than at the minute there's quite a variable number of conflicting. But I think that adaptation space is something that we do want to really be cognizant of, and make sure that we are doing that economically. I think there is something that as a sector we do need to look at. We need to understand that when we are designing to lifetime homes, how often is that used? And is there, for example, a menu of options that we could use, that some houses are within housing stock, some houses aren't? Is some of that preventing us making use and utilisation of specific sites, for example, because lifetime homes just can't be accommodated, but actually you could deliver a quality home, but we're having to bypass that particular location because it doesn't lend itself, just given its topography. So I think I would like to reassure that, as that sector rep there, that design quality and making sure that we are meeting the needs of our customers both now and into the future will be a central core objective of that and won't be lost.
Thank you, and I am glad to hear. And the other element of that is actually, even right now, getting suitable homes for people who have disabilities. So there is a need even now, apart from the future need. There's a lack of supply potentially in some areas right now. But listen, go ahead very briefly, Anita, please.
We do 10% of all of our new homes that are wheelchair. Interestingly, they're challenging to let, and we would actually, hopefully through the thing is say, we don't need to put maybe everything in at the minute if we agree to do it afterwards, because some people don't need everything now, but it makes it look less homely. So I think there's a bit of flexibility around. We have to tick all these boxes. Yeah. We could take an undertaking to do some of these things, but I think some of these things would be better to be let, and we have then that long-term flexibility. So I think it's a wee bit more flexibility, I think, is what we're aiming for.
Yeah, no, and you have the capacity to do it without major structural change or whatever, and that's useful. Listen, been a really good session. I get a sense we could have went on for just as long again. Appreciate all the work that you do and coming today with the particular expertise that you have, and thank you for attending committee today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, members, can I check then if there's anything in the way of follow-up actions that members want to note in relation to this issue? Kelly.
Could I ask the department if their plans for the housing executive to be able to borrow come to fruition through the Treasury, will the housing executive then be getting their money, part of their money out of the HAG, the Housing Associations grant?
Where the housing executive would be building?
Building, yeah.
Members content we seek the information?
Just because I'm not clear on this, how this is going to work, given how much money's in the HAG.
Okay. Okay. Anything else, members? So we have members, we're now moving. So I go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, sure. Just two very interesting points that come out in that briefing was obviously that piece around the model around paying back the loans 35, 45 years, and there was a point referenced there about actually them not being viable at all, and they'll have to continue to borrow to sustain the loan. Can we maybe summarise those points and put them to the department? Because obviously, as Malaysia has already pointed out, the department has taken a contrary view to that. And also then there was a reference to a review around global events. Maybe can we put that to the department around is that exceptional enough for them to trigger that aspect of the review before April 27?
Yeah, two proposals there. Are members content with both of those? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, members. That's a very useful session, and appreciate members' contribution to that. Members, as the next agenda item is an oral briefing in relation to TNIF, and the department has requested to be held in closed session, I propose the meeting now moves into closed session and that we take a short break and then resume at agenda item 7 in closed. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Great. Thank you, members. And Clerk, can you take us out of broadcasting?
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
She confirmed live.
Okay, thank you, members. So that's us resuming then, and just to record that we have asked the department for the number of legal cases ongoing and the associated financial impact, and also that we are have asked for a list of all possible, or we're agreed to ask for a list of all possible types of financial transaction capital being considered currently by the department. Members content? Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. Okay, members, moving to agenda item 8 then, which is at SL1. It's Universal Credit, Personal Independence Payment, Jobseekers Allowance and Employment and Support Allowance, Claims and Payments, brackets Amendment, Regulations, NI 2026. So we received the SL1 on the 13th of March, and the relevant papers can be found by starting at page 71 of your meeting pack. Members should note that as the department must lay the rule as soon as possible after DWP lay its corresponding SI, which they are due to do on 20th of March, the committee is being asked to consider this at today's meeting. So we have with us then from the department Haley Ward and Haley's policy lead, and Katrina Coulter, who's deputy policy lead in this area. You're very welcome this afternoon. I'll not go through the purpose because I believe you could do that for us more effectively. So could you please take the committee through the detail, and then we can get to questions from members when you're finished. Is it yourself, Haley, please? Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for giving us the opportunity to attend in relation to the SL1 for these regulations. The proposed statutory rule protects child maintenance payments by permanently placing child maintenance deductions at the top of the regulated priority order for deductions from a claimant's Universal Credit Award. This follows the UK Government's decision to move child maintenance deductions temporarily up the priority order from the 30th of April 2025 for 12 months. This decision was made to prevent any reduction in the amount of child maintenance deductions due to the fair repayment rate, which reduced the maximum amount that can be deducted from the Universal Credit Standard Allowance from 25% to 15%. Placing child maintenance deductions at the top of the regulated priority order also allows deductions to be made where the 15% cap will be exceeded, as it's classed as a last resort deduction. Other last resort deductions include owner-occupier service charge arrears, rent and/or service charge arrears, and gas and electric arrears. These deductions help support vulnerable individuals who, for example, are at risk of homelessness or who may have had their fuel supply cut off. The temporary change is due to expire on the 30th of April 2026. Committee previously considered and was content with the proposals around the temporary legislative change in the Universal Credit, Personal Independence Payment, Jobseekers Allowance and Employment Support Allowance Claims and Payments Amendment and Modification Regulations Northern Ireland 2025. Since then, DWP completed an analysis of the impact of the temporary legislative change, considering the effect on universal credit households with a child maintenance deduction and their ability to manage other third-party debts within the priority order, as well as the broader implications for child poverty. On balance, it concludes that the temporary measure has met the policy objective of maintaining the number of monthly child maintenance deductions and therefore should be made permanent from the 30th of April 2026. By prioritising child maintenance payments and making the change permanent, the policy supports the best interests of the child and reflects the UK Government's commitment to safeguarding financial support due to children, particularly where a paying parent is already subject to multiple existing deductions. Based on the caseload in Great Britain, estimated to be impacted by the change, if child maintenance deductions were to revert to its former position in the priority order, the volume of deductions in Northern Ireland would fall from approximately 2,400 to 920 per month as of data from November 2025. The committee will be aware of the very particular challenges that the department faces in the timelines relating to parity social security legislation and our legal obligations in that regard. Unfortunately, we have been unable on this occasion to share with the committee the draft of the proposed statutory rule and the explanatory memorandum as required under the new procedures which came into effect on the 5th of January. The department intends to lay the proposed statutory rule as soon as possible after DWP, expected to be the 20th or the 23rd of March, but no later than the 9th of April. This is in order to ensure that the regulations can come into operation on the 30th of April 2026 in alignment with DWP while adhering to the 21-day rule. Unfortunately, the department has been unable to share the draft statutory rule and explanatory memorandum with the committee as set out in the new guidance because the final draft was only received this week. The department has conducted the usual screening exercises in relation to the statutory rule. No rural, regulatory or data protection impacts were identified. A Section 75 screening was also carried out, which concluded that the policy would not have significant implications for equality of opportunity or good relations, and that an equality impact assessment was not necessary. A child rights impact assessment was also concluded, since the proposal impacts children of receiving and paying parents. The department has concluded that this statutory rule helps look after the best interests of the child, as it protects more child maintenance payments for receiving parents. The statutory rule will therefore have a positive impact for those receiving parents and children who rely on child maintenance deductions. We would be happy to take any questions from members.
Okay, thank you. So I'll take indications from members if they want to have questions. But can I just double check, Haley, is there any reason why this committee can't reserve decision until next week when we will have the draft and the explanatory memorandum?
Normally it's procedure just delay as soon as possible after DWP, so that's...
Well, normally we like to see the draft.
I understand that. We will have the draft available for you and we'll be able to share it on Friday if that is helpful.
Yeah, so, but we would have time, within the time frames, we would have time to do this next week and have the draft in front of us. Yeah. I've asked Kylie a question there first.
Oh, sorry.
We would have time to do this next week and have the draft in front of us within the time frame.
In theory, yes. We wouldn't normally wait that long after DWP makes the legislation in order to lay and make our legislation.
Okay, well, I'm keen to ensure maximum scrutiny even with the restrictions. Go ahead, Kelly, please.
I was just going to say, maybe I've read it wrong. The operational date that DWP have suggested is the 30th of April.
Yeah.
And you're going to have the SI or from them, or SR from them, on the 20th or 23rd of March.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we do have a bit of... I know I appreciate Easter's in the middle of that and recess, but ministerial business takes precedence over anything else in the House. I prefer to see it first.
Sean?
Yeah, Chair, that was just going to be my comment, just around the timelines. And whilst, on the face of it, this looks grand, I do think that best practice would indicate that we shouldn't be agreeing something that we don't have in front of us. I would be more content, even if we can get it sent on the Friday, but just to see it before we agree anything.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any further questions for the officials then, members? Okay, well, can I remind members that the absence of the draft copy of the rule doesn't prevent us from proceeding, but we were reminded a number of weeks ago that this should be exceptional and should be recorded in the minutes. The Minister has requested the committee consider the proposed statutory rule within a shortened time frame. A shortened time frame does not preclude the committee from issuing a call for views. However, this may result in the committee making a decision on the SL1 before responses are received. Any responses would contribute to committee scrutiny at the statutory rule stage rather than the SL1 stage. So the committee team will issue a call for views on the SL1 using the standard survey on citizen space from today, 19th of March 2026. Alongside this, once the draft rule and EM is received, these will be published on the committee website and notified to relevant stakeholders alongside the relevant deadline where appropriate. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Great, thank you. Members have any further comments at this stage? No. Okay, thank you, Hayley. Thank you. Okay, members, moving on then to agenda item 9, matters arising. So you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 87. I intend to go through each matter individually as we've received a series of responses from the Department to the Committee's queries in correspondence, and I'll ask for comments as I go through from 9.2 to 9.14. Further items are also contained in table papers, which are 9.16 to 9.18. So starting off then with item 9.2, that's regards to welfare supplementary payments annual report and the monitoring in place for transitional protection. The Department have advised that Department officials can brief the Committee on transitional protection and provide an update on the move to Universal Credit Programme. They have also advised that there are no plans to bring forward any welfare mitigation legislation in this mandate. Do members have any comments or views in relation to that item? I would have to say I'm disappointed that there's no legislation being. I see that, clerk. Yeah, write it down there and I'll come to her. So I would be very disappointed that we could be looming another cliff edge looming in relation to this. I would have preferred to have seen legislation being at least drafted, but it doesn't seem to be that's not going to happen in this. So, Sian?
Yep, sure, exactly the same as yourself. This is a drum I think quite a few of us have been banging for quite a wee while. We cannot be in the same situation that we've left people in the last 2 cliff edges. So I am disappointed that legislation isn't at least being looked at or prepared for the next mandate, given how quickly that cliff edge will loom in a new mandate, and would be more than happy to receive a briefing on the transitional protections as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, members, then item 9.3 is information about legislative amendments proposed by Treasury to be made via statutory instrument in Westminster. As financial services matters are reserved, the Department has offered to support the Committee in seeking a briefing from HM Treasury officials on the aims and policy objectives underpinning those proposals. So do members wish to request a briefing in relation to this SI? Yeah. So yeah, members content with that. Any other comment on that one, or members content to move on to 9.4, which is a response regarding the Treasury open book exercise? Members have any comments or views they'd like to raise? No. Item 9.5 is a response in regards to the review of Kerr's Allowance. The Department has advised that further engagement with DWP to better understand the review's recommendations. DWP's response and plans for implementation is planned, and until these discussions have taken place, it's difficult to provide definitive numbers of customers impacted here. So do members have any comments or views they want to raise in relation to that, Kat?
I'm just going to say that it says, confirm that further engagement with DWP is to be early 2026. It's March. What's early? I would have thought we would have had something a bit more from now by now.
Do we have any indication at this point? No. Do we want to seek a timeline in relation to that at this stage, or?
To be honest, it's in the hands of DWP, I suppose. But
Can I seek clarification? Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
In relation to 9.2.
Yeah.
Sian had suggested
the
transitional protection briefing. Was that agreed?
Are members content with that?
Yes.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
9.6 is a response on the building safety policy and our request for any information held on the frequency of the building safety checks and the regulatory responsibility for a inspection. So are there any issues in relation to that the members wish to flag up? Kelly?
This is a prime example of silo mentality. You know, there's health provides some because of the fire and rescue service, housing executive and other things. Is anybody actually looking at the holistic viewpoint of some of these buildings? Grenfell is a prime example of what happens when you don't join things up together. I just wonder, building safety seems to fall across a number of stools. Should there not be a one place that you can actually see where a building has its safety records? I don't know who we can ask to do that, because communities is saying it's everybody else bar them. It's one of those ones, for instance, for the civil service estate, it's Department of Finance, that's very clear. But all these records, you have to know who's done the safety check before you can go and ask for them. I'm just wondering if there's any review there. I don't know whether that's finance or economy or who it might be. Is there any overarching connection to make sure that buildings are safe, especially those buildings that are used for public purposes?
Should we ask the department what work they're engaging with other departments around the streamlining of these? Because they are crucial inspections. So maybe start off with that, with asking the department what streamlining, given the potential for things to fall between scrutiny bodies. Members content? We do that. 9.7 is regarding the draft anti-poverty strategy progress and the committee's query over the absence of opportunity for committee oversight on the work of the anti-poverty strategy. Any comments in relation to that, members? Sian?
I don't know if I'm reading the wrong letter, but when I looked at what we asked for and what we got in response, I don't think there's many answers in that letter, Chair, which is really disappointing. We haven't heard whether meetings of that board are going to be open to the public. We don't know how many times they've met currently, what approach the department is actually taking in terms of the planning of that. I understand that what they're saying is that the operation of the anti-poverty strategy board will be finalised as part of that process. So does that mean that has not actually met yet? I find that really disappointing. We keep being told, obviously, that this work has been ongoing, that it's not just grounded in the anti-poverty strategy, that there are, in terms of working groups and dedicated people in each of the departments working on anti-poverty work as a joined up approach. It doesn't seem to me in that letter that any joined up approach has been engaged in thus far. So if possible, Chair, I would like to go back to the department and ask, if it isn't the anti-poverty strategy board, can we know what anti-poverty work has been going on cross-departmentally since the draft anti-poverty strategy was released? Members content with that?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And members, just to flag also, we have the department scheduled to come in on the 7th of May. But I share your concern, Sian, I have to say. And I mean, this is so crucial, there can be no sense of drift, and there is a bit of that going on here, that that there's no concrete information. So I think it will be useful to clarify. Thank you.
That's what cross-party working has been ongoing in the intervening period. Yeah.
Please, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Item 9.8 then in matters arising is availability of funding provided to disabled sports clubs and teams. Any comment, members?
Andy's question.
Yeah, and we don't have Andy. We don't have Andy online present. Item 9.9 is regarding the Department of Work and Pensions Universal Credit Bill Impact Assessment. The Department has advised that impact assessments in relation to Section 75 were not conducted here, as this was shared with DWP during the Bill's legislative passage. The Department has acknowledged the importance of understanding the local impact of welfare policies, and officials will take forward work to assess the impact of British Government changes here. So any views or comments in relation to that, members? I think it's useful that work is to be taken forward. It's an important gap or potential gap at the very least, so that would be useful. So thank you. 9.10 is in regards to financial issues faced by supporting people providers and our request of any details of action being taken in relation to prospective job losses and the continued delivery of services. Members, we have received a response from the Minister regarding a report. So first of all, on 9.10, is there any comment in relation to 9.10 itself? Yep, go ahead.
I appreciate the additional £1.98 million of funding, but it's a little disingenuous to say that it was additional funding to supporting people, given the fact that it only just covered the increased national insurance costs. Frontline workers have said that they haven't had a pay increase in 10 years. Previously, in the last mandate, this department had agreed to living wage, but they're not making sure that that's paid to frontline workers out there, especially those who are working through the night in some really horrible conditions in order to support some of our most vulnerable people. I know that we've heard today from Michael from Choice Housing that there's a review of the housing, how that's funded. I would like to ask the department, are they going to actually review supporting people? Because if they're going to add in through the legislation, the housing bill legislation, additional work streams, yet they're not putting up the money for supporting people to cover the massive amount of people that they do look after, then to be honest, we're harming vulnerable people by losing so many of those frontline staff because of the poor pay conditions that they have. So £1.98 million is very welcome, but it met a bit of the salary bill.
Members contented we write that letter to the department? Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, can I check, Clerk, have we received a response from the Minister regarding the report into homelessness which was sent on 28th of January? We got that in the pack.
No response yet to the mini report. I can chase that
if not, it might be a good idea to chase that up. Thank you. So members, any other comments or in relation to that one? No. 9.11 then is regarding the rate support grant paper sent to the Minister from Derry City and Strabane District Council. Any comments in relation to that? Members want to raise? No. Thank you. 9.12 is a response regarding the review of design standards. Do members have any comments or views they'd like to raise in relation to that? Go ahead, Kelly.
Earlier, I have a concern that we are considering the design standards in a way that means that lifetime home standards are talked about being removed, and it means then that even though a house can be designed to be a bit more flexible, so you can add on a downstairs bathroom, for instance, it still means additional costs. So instead of putting all the costs in at the start, when you can actually get the benefit of not having VAT, we're pushing some of that stuff to the back, which means that vulnerable people, instead of having a home that meets their needs, it looks like we're designing them out of it. I just have concerns. I know that there's the consultation period, I think, is closed now. I've certainly put in a consultation response to that, but I think it's one that we need to keep on the radar to see what's happening with this, because we could improve community by designing good houses, as was heard today from Anita. They want to be proud of the houses. I just think designing them to be less than what the private sector can expect isn't fair. So I don't know how we can keep on top. I suppose we get an update from the department after they have reviewed the consultation responses to see what way they're going to go on this. Because if they're talking about reducing the design standards as a race to the bottom, we can't let that happen.
Yeah, and I was struck in the earlier session actually where people are saying, people admire what it is that we're doing, and then we're actually going about dismantling something that is, for very good reason, seen as a positive, and indeed better outcomes for social outcomes, but also better financial outcomes in relation to doing it potentially at this point.
One of the biggest points is we have an ageing population. When was the last time the design standards took age into consideration? Because we want people to be able to stay at home longer, healthier. And with age, unfortunately, comes things like limited mobility. If we're designing houses not to suit an ageing population, it sort of means that we're just building up money that we're going to have to spend in the future.
Yeah. Okay, what was the action there?
Whether the committee wanted to ask DFC for an update post-consultation. I think we had previously asked for one at the end of the review process, which we were told was September.
Well, I suppose it'll probably be the same time then. Yeah. Yeah.
So no action then? No.
The only other thing would be if we can ask the department as part of their considerations, because it's not in the consultation, is the changing demographics in Northern Ireland to older tenants, and what considerations being made of that.
Pretty content.
Very content with that. Yep. Thank you. Okay, 9.13 then is a detailed response regarding the National Wealth Fund and Warm Home Fund. Do members have any comment in relation to that? 9.14 is regarding benefit fraud and error. The department have amended and reissued the letter originally sent on 13th of March. Therefore, the letter issued on 16th of March at page 149 of the pack is the updated item and should be the item that is considered. Do members have any comments or views they want to raise in relation to that? No. Members have been provided with a tabled matters raising memo then at page 3 of your tabled papers. Item 9.16 is a lengthy response regarding the sign language master's course being delivered at Queen's University. We had previously written to the department during the committee stage of the bill, as members will recall. Members, this response may help to inform any comments you wish to make during consideration stage next Tuesday. Okay, any other comments in relation to that? Item 9.7 then entabled is a response in regards to local housing allowance and average rents and the committee's request for data of households in each broad rental market area and the number of households receiving local housing allowance and in receipt of discretionary housing payments. Do members have any comments or views they want to raise in relation to that response? No, thank you. And finally, members, item 9.18 is regarding the Private Tenancies Act and is a response to our letter of 17th of September 25 asking which aspects of these regulations would require legislation and a specific timetable as to when the regulations will be brought forward. Does that go back to 17th of September since we sent for that? We wrote that? That's a long... do members have any comments in relation to the response? No. Okay. Thank you, members. That concludes matters arising for today. Moving on to agenda item 10, correspondence. I'll proceed through the correspondence list in bundles and only draw attention to those which require a committee decision, and members can then draw out others that they may wish to. But I would ask if you wish to draw out or highlight any of those, please let me know. And please use the reference in the memo at item 10.1, starting on page 159 of your pack. The first item that I wanted to draw out is 10.5, which is a ministerial statement setting out the department's response to some of the recommendations made in the NDNA reviews into the Commissioner for Children, Young People and the Commissioner for Older People. Given this statement and the NIFHA annual report at item 10.7, would members agree that we seek views in relation to the proposals from both commissioners? Yeah, go ahead, Kathy.
Just really briefly on that, Chair. It actually really concerned me whenever I seen that coming through. And I just don't feel that there's enough explanation as to why a number of these haven't been accepted. And you can see firsthand, I think we can all see firsthand the work that both does, but I suppose specifically I see with Nicky and with Chris Quinn, the work that he's doing. I'd be really, really keen just to hear what his view is on those. He's so vocal on so many really, really vital issues with our children and young people, that I'd be really concerned that what this is going to mean for them.
Okay, thank you. Members can help me seek views. Commissioners, thank you. Item 10.8 is an update from the department in terms of the legislative approach to the breathing space debt respite scheme for Northern Ireland here. So as a committee, we were waiting confirmation on whether there would be another fifth bill brought forward by the department in relation to debt respite. It looks like aspects of the legislative proposals could be progressed without a new bill, and the department has offered a briefing in relation to the scheme to assist with our scrutiny. Can I ask if members will be content that we proceed to schedule a briefing? Yeah. Thank you. Do members want to draw attention to any other item in this bundle? That's from 10.2 to 10.8, and then I'm moving on to 10.9 to 10.16. Members content. So moving to 10.9 to 10.16. If I could draw out 10.15 as correspondence from Inspire regarding supported housing. They've suggested a joint informal briefing between this committee and the Committee for Health. Members, go ahead, Kelly.
There's something happening here that I'm not very comfortable with. Joint committee meetings are supposed to be called by the committees, but we're getting other outside bodies asking us to do joint committee meetings coming up to the end of a mandate. How many more of these are we going to have? I understand where Inspire's coming from, and it's a very important point. But for two committees to be pulled into an informal session, to be able to do it, we had that the other day, and I have to say, what was at that other informal session was more of a sales pitch than it was anything else. We get what Inspire are doing. I think, to be honest, I would prefer at this stage to write to the department on the basis of that letter to ask what they're doing about it, rather than, because I don't know what the expectation is from Inspire. Do they think that they come along to both committees and we can do some sort of an inquiry and make the ministers do something? I would prefer to put it to the department first.
Okay, Sean?
Yeah, no, that's grand, Chair. I get where Kelly's coming from there. I think in something like this, I was named as one of those who had met with Inspire to see firsthand what they're doing up in my own constituency, up in Shields Court. So I think I can see where there is a huge overlap between communities and health. And to be honest, I think if one department is moving but you're not getting progress in the other department, it stalls everything, and then it has a knock-on effect in all departments involved. So I do think that there is some merit in trying to understand where the overlap is and where the pressure points are in each department, particularly in their resources and their resourcing of work like this, especially when you're looking at just how much savings can be taken from the work that the community voluntary sector and in particular this organisation do. I think for me that's where the interest lies, is that best use of public money and actually understanding where that can be really strengthened on both sides and in both departments.
Yeah, our own mini report did actually touch upon this as well, and it's clearly something that we see in relation to my own membership of PAC, where these joint or intra-departmental issues are certainly significant. But I also take Kelly's point around the purpose of that. But I wonder then, should we do two things? First of all, write to the Department of Health in relation to Kelly's proposal to ask what they're doing about it, and then potentially to write to the Committee for Health in the first instance to see what their view is, or would they be interested in taking a lead potentially on that, seek their view.
They're considering it this afternoon.
Okay, so
we may overlap. I can liaise with that.
We may have information back. Go ahead, Pam.
I do see where we're going with this conversation, although I think it's such an important issue. I would like to be facilitating this if possible. I wonder, is it worth even putting this off until we hear how Health has reacted to it?
I think we could still continue that action.
We could still actually write.
Still write to Health
on issues rather than say no outright.
And revisit then when we hear how the consideration within Health.
I'm a bit worried that organisations believe that they can call two committees together, but I don't know what their expectation is. The outcome is going to be. Mm-hmm. We can't make a minister do something. I think that's what I'm worried about. Is this the new lobbying tool? Is to call for joint committees. And to be honest, it's a very important piece, so I can get why they want the committees to come together, but I think it's the wrong place. I think it's more departmental level.
Yeah. Okay, well listen, let's take those couple of actions for now, come back to it and see what members think. I think there's a sense that it is an important issue. I certainly would not want to be in a situation where we're unfairly heightening expectations, that just by the fact of having a joint meeting that might in itself make a real difference. But I think they're important issues to consider.
I'm just wondering, do we have any precedents?
That one that was done around the online risk. Yeah. Was a similar one?
Security one last week. Finance took the lead on that and asked members to attend a joint informal, and this is a joint informal. I think somebody has noticed that this has happened now. So joint informal in and of itself is not difficult to set up. It's whether members are available to attend.
Yeah, and that's another factor as well as pressure.
And you know, there's always willingness to do all these things, but then you're in the chamber and you're trying to do everything at once. it does become very difficult. But
let's see what proposal come out of health, and let's also write that. Yeah.
Am I writing to the Department of Health?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Okay.
And enclosing that issue, yeah.
Yep.
And to Committee for Health as well.
Yeah. They're already looking at that
They'll
this
be looking at
afternoon.
this too.
Okay, in relation to 10.9 to 10.16, members, you've been provided with table correspondence at page 23. Sorry, we're moving on then. If members have nothing else in 10.9 to 10.16, then we have table papers and any items from 10.18 to 10.20. I'll just flag up 10.20, which starts at page 64. It's an offer from Housing Rights in relation to future legislative proposals around notice to quit periods. Our members contact the committee team arrange to schedule that briefing in advance of the committee's consideration of any future regulations. Yeah. Is there anything else within 10.18 to 10.2? No. Otherwise, our members then content with the memo within the tabled and main packs. Yeah, thank you. Okay, members, moving on to agenda item 15, forward work programme, a copy of which is at page 444. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme? Content, thank you. Do members have any other business they wish to raise? No, thank you. Agenda item 17 then is date, time and location of next meeting. Members, our next meeting will be at 10.
Chair.
Yes, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Apologies. It's just under any other business.
Yeah.
I have been made aware by some in the arts sector just that the arts and culture and heritage, the paper that had been released last year was due to go out for public consultation. In a number of meetings, officials from the department had indicated that that would be out fairly promptly for public consultation, and it has not yet been out. I was wondering if we would be able to write to the department and just ask for an update on that. The consultation around that piece of work in culture, arts and heritage, please.
Members content? Yeah, thank you. Members are content, Clerk. Thank you, Sean. So agenda item 17 then, date, time and location of next meeting. Our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 26th of March 2026, here in room 29, Parliament Buildings. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. And I could ask the clerk to take us out of broadcasting.
Committee room 29, sound. 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 Committee room 29, sound.